The world was quiet, too quiet. Yet silence is never truly empty. It hides things. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, beyond the chatter of crowded streets and the glow of city lights, something ancient stirred. A secret heartbeat pulsed under the skin of reality, waiting to be noticed. Few could sense it. Fewer still could understand it. But destiny does not wait for understanding. It simply chooses. And so, it chose them. The chosen ones. Not because they were ready, not because they were pure, but because fate had marked them with a burden no ordinary soul could carry. To the world, they looked like everyone else. Students, workers, wanderers. But inside, their blood burned with something untamed, something waiting to awaken. They thought it was a blessing, a gift meant to protect and to save. They didn't see the shadow hidden within that gift. Among them, however, was one who sensed the truth. The I. Narrator, a voice of warning. They had once walked with the circle, felt the same burning power, but they saw what others refused to see. Power never stays gentle, and once it wakes, it demands a price. They spoke the warning, and the others, they ignored it. Excitement drowned out caution. Hope silenced fear. And so the story begins. Not with triumph, but with denial. Not with victory, but with the first step toward losing control. It was on a night heavy with storms that the truth was spoken aloud. The air itself seemed to tremble as if creation wanted to listen. In the heart of a crumbling temple, voices were silenced when an ancient presence filled the room. Time stopped, shadows bent, and then it spoke. The balance between light and darkness is breaking. You have been chosen to restore it. The words did not sound like sound at all. They were carved into their bones, etched into their very souls. None could escape them. Each of the chosen ones felt the invisible mark press into their hearts, binding them to a destiny they could neither reject nor deny. Some looked proud, standing taller as if glory had touched them. Others trembled, their eyes wide with fear. A few wept silently, not from sadness but from the weight of something too great to carry. Yet, in the end, all accepted. They were told that the fate of the world now rested in their hands. But destiny is never merciful. The prophecy spoke not of victory, only of restoration. Not of triumph, only of sacrifice. And though their hearts burned with purpose, the seed of danger was already sown. For every light that shines too brightly casts a darker shadow. The prophecy had marked them, but the true test came when their powers began to stir. At first it was subtle. Dreams laced with fire, whispers carried on the wind, sudden flashes of light or shadow when emotions ran high. They tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but deep inside each knew the awakening had begun. One by one, the chosen ones discovered what lay dormant in their blood. For some, it was terrifying. Hands shaking as lightning danced across their skin, voices trembling, as visions of the future spilled unbidden from their lips. For others, it was intoxicating, an intoxicating rush of strength, speed, or unbreakable will that made them feel untouchable. They gathered in secret places, abandoned warehouses, forgotten ruins, hidden forests, testing the limits of their gifts. Laughter echoed when a power worked as intended, and gasps filled the air when it spiraled beyond control. The line between triumph and disaster blurred quickly. But through it all, the narrator remained uneasy. Power was not a toy. Power was not a gift, it was a beast that demanded to be fed. And each day the beast grew hungrier. The others celebrated their blessings, blind to the shadows curling at their feet. They called it destiny. The narrator called it a warning, and so, while the chosen ones embraced their awakening, a silent storm began to gather above them. The narrator's words echoed like thunder, but the chosen ones only laughed. "You fear too much," they said. "This is what we were promised. This is our destiny." Each warning was met with dismissal. When the narrator cautioned them about balance, they answered with arrogance. When urged to train with discipline, they mocked the idea. drunk on newfound strength. They believed power alone would shield them from whatever darkness lurked beyond. But warnings are not given in vain. Strange signs began to ripple through their world, animals scattering from forests, the skies painted with unnatural storms, whispers slipping into dreams that were not their own. The narrator pointed, pleaded, begged them to see. Still, they turned away. Pride blinded them. Excitement deafened them. And in their blindness they failed to see that their control was slipping. At first it was small, a wall accidentally shattered, a fire that burned longer than intended, a vision that bled into reality. Yet each incident grew bolder, hungrier. The very powers they celebrated were beginning to betray them. The narrator stood apart, carrying the heavy burden of foresight. Alone in their knowing, they whispered into the void, "They won't listen. But when the storm comes, they'll remember that I warned them first." And overhead the storm grew darker still. The signs grew impossible to ignore. What once seemed like accidents now revealed themselves as cracks in the foundation of their control. A chosen one who could summon fire found the flames no longer obeyed. They spread wildly, devouring everything, in sight until others rushed to contain it. Another, gifted with visions, began screaming uncontrollably, unable to distinguish between past, present, and future. One by one they stumbled under the weight of what they thought they could command. The world around them began to suffer. Crops withered overnight under unnatural frost. Rivers swelled with black water that poisoned the earth. Villages whispered of curses, turning fearful eyes toward the chosen ones they once celebrated. Still they clung to denial. "We can handle this," they repeated. "It's just a phase." But the narrator knew better. Collapse always begins quietly, like a hairline fracture spreading through stone. And once the cracks spread far enough, no force can stop the breaking. The chosen ones gathered once more, faces strained, voices raised in argument. Fear flickered behind their pride, though none dared to name it. The air itself felt heavier, as though the storm above was pressing down on them, and in that moment, the narrator's heart sank. Not because destruction was near, but because they realized the chosen ones would not admit the truth until it was far too late. While the chosen ones wrestled with their unstable powers, something darker stirred in the corners of the world. The shadows had always been there, silent, waiting, but now they grew bold, creeping into places once untouched by darkness. First it was whispers, voices carried on the wind, twisting truth into poison. Villagers woke screaming, claiming they felt hands dragging them down in their dreams. Crops rotted faster, wells turned bitter, and the skies dimmed even in daylight. The narrator saw it clearly. These were not random misfortunes. The powers of the chosen ones, left unchecked, had cracked open doors that should have remained sealed. From those doors, shadows began to rise. The chosen ones, however, refused to believe. "We are not the cause," they said. "This darkness comes from outside." But the narrator shook their head. The truth was harsher. The shadows were not invading, the shadows were responding. Each misuse of power fed the growing storm. Each denial gave the darkness more room to spread. And as the balance shifted, creatures long forgotten stirred in the abyss, their eyes glowing with hunger for a world ripe for taking. The chosen ones continued their bickering, blind to the truth, that the shadows did not fear them. They were drawn to them, and above the storm rumbled louder than ever. Unity had once been their strength, but now cracks began to show, not just in their powers but in their trust. Some of the chosen ones insisted the narrator was wrong, that warnings only bred fear. "We must embrace our destiny," they argued. "Fear is weakness." Others, shaken by the rising shadows, whispered that perhaps the narrator was right. Fear became suspicion, and suspicion became division. Arguments turned into shouting matches, shouts into threats, and soon, the bond that once tied them together began to unravel. One chosen accused another of losing control deliberately, of endangering them all. Another sneered, claiming jealousy drove the accusation. What had once been camaraderie now festered into rivalry. each secretly wondering if they could trust the ones beside them. The shadows fed on this. Every raised voice, every clenched fist, seemed to thicken the air with darkness. The storm above no longer needed to grow, it was being pulled down by their very discord. The narrator watched with heavy eyes. They don't see it, they thought. The greatest danger is not the storm above or the shadows below, it's the fracture within. For a group destined to save the world, they now stood at the edge of destroying themselves first. Every fracture eventually splits into something deeper. For the chosen ones, it came in the form of betrayal. One among them, once loyal and proud, began to listen to the whispers of the shadows. The voice promised control, promised peace, promised the power to silence the chaos tearing them apart. All it required was obedience. At first, the betrayer hid it well, slipping away at night, returning with excuses. But soon their actions revealed the truth. Warnings ignored, missions sabotaged, trust deliberately eroded. The chosen ones grew suspicious, but by then, the poison had already spread. The moment of betrayal arrived without warning. In the middle of a gathering, when tempers flared hottest, the betrayer unleashed their power not against the shadows but against their own. Lightning cut through the room, fire roared, and allies became targets. The chosen ones staggered in shock. "Why?" they cried. But the answer was cruelly simple. Because unity is a lie, the shadows offer freedom, and I chose freedom. The storm outside rumbled in approval as though the world itself delighted in their collapse. The narrator's heart broke, not because betrayal had come, but because they had seen it coming all along. Betrayal never comes without a price. The chosen ones paid dearly for theirs. The hall became a battlefield. Lightning tore through stone pillars, fire licked across the walls, and shadows danced wildly as the betrayer struck with fury. There, once friends scrambled to defend themselves, but hesitation weakened them. How could they fight someone they once called brother, sister, ally? In that hesitation, lives were lost. A chosen with the gift of healing fell, overwhelmed before they could call upon their gift. Another, whose strength had carried the group through countless trials, was crushed beneath the very stones they had sworn to protect. Screams filled the chamber, echoing like a dirge. The survivors fought back, their combined powers finally forcing the betrayer to retreat into the shadows. But victory was hollow. The air smelled of ash and blood, the walls stained with loss. Kneeling beside their fallen, the chosen ones finally understood. Betrayal had cost them more than allies, it had cost them their innocence. No longer could they believe themselves untouchable. No longer could they pretend destiny guaranteed their survival. The narrator whispered to the silence, "I warned you. Power without discipline breeds ruin. And now, the ruin has begun." Outside, the storm split the sky with a thunderclap, sealing the truth in fire and rain. Silence hung heavy in the ruined hall, broken only by the crackle of dying flames. Yet within that silence, whispers began to stir. The fallen were not entirely gone. Their spirits lingered, trapped between realms, unwilling to abandon the cause they had bled for. At first, the chosen ones thought it was grief twisting their minds, but soon the voices grew clearer. Echoes carried on the wind, whispers that brushed against their ears like the rustle of leaves. Do not falter. The war is not yet lost. We stand with you still. The survivors trembled. Their hearts were broken, yet hope flickered anew. For though bodies had perished, the essence of their comrades endured. And with that essence came warnings. The whispers spoke of dangers yet unseen, of traps woven into the very path the chosen must take. They revealed glimpses of the betrayer's plan, a ritual, dark and consuming, that would bind the world in chains of despair. But the voices were faint, fading with each word. The cost of speaking from beyond was great, and soon the silence reclaimed them. One chosen knelt, pressing their hand to the cold floor, vowing through tears, "We will not waste your sacrifice. We will carry your fire." Outside, the storm eased. Raindrops fell like tears from the heavens as though the sky itself mourned and yet blessed the vow. The whispers had spoken of it, a ritual so dark it could bend the very fabric of creation. Now, at last, fragments of the betrayer's plan came to light. Deep beneath the earth, in caverns untouched by the sun, a circle of obsidian had been carved. Around it, symbols older than memory pulsed faintly, feeding on the fear of the world above. This was no ordinary act of sorcery. It was a binding, a chain meant to ensnare the souls of the living and the dead alike. The betrayer stood, at its center, cloaked in shadows, speaking words that made the air itself tremble. With each syllable, cracks spread across reality, thin veils between realms shivering as if they might collapse. The chosen ones, guided by the whispers of their fallen, began to piece together the ritual's purpose. It was not merely about control, it was about erasure, a rewriting of destiny, where free will would wither and every soul would march to the betrayer's command. But rituals of such magnitude required sacrifice. And as the chosen learned more, dread filled their hearts. The betrayer had already chosen the offerings, lives stolen from villages, innocents taken to fuel the spell. Time was slipping away. If the final incantation was spoken, chains of despair would shackle the earth, and so the chosen steeled themselves, knowing the path forward would lead them into the very heart of darkness. The shadows deepened as the chosen ones journeyed closer to the source of the darkness. Each step weighed heavy, for they knew that the path ahead led not only to the betrayer's lair, but to their own reckoning. The land itself seemed to resist them. Forests twisted unnaturally, branches reaching like claws. Rivers ran black, carrying whispers of fear in their currents. Even the animals had fled, leaving behind an unsettling silence, broken only by the thunder in the distance. As the group pressed on, vision struck them, flashes of what awaited. They saw themselves locked in battle, their faces strained with exhaustion, the betrayer towering above, drenched in power stolen from the ritual. Some faltered. Doubt gnawed at them. Was this fight winnable? Could mortals, even chosen ones, stand against a force that had bent the laws of reality? Yet within their hearts burned the echoes of the fallen. The whispers of sacrifice, of courage, and of vows made in blood steadied them. They remembered the villages that had been emptied, the innocents chained in darkness, and the promise they had made to carry the fire forward. Night fell heavy, stars veiled by a swirling storm. The betrayer's fortress rose in the distance, jagged spires clawing at the heavens. Its gates glowed with unnatural light, daring them to enter. The confrontation was no longer a distant fear. It was here. It was now. And the chosen ones tightened their grip on their weapons, hearts pounding, as destiny loomed before them. The fortress loomed like a wound upon the world, its jagged spires reaching to tear the heavens. The air itself was heavy, thick with the stench of burning stone and the taste of iron. The chosen ones approached the gates, their footsteps echoing against the barren ground. They could feel it, the eyes of countless unseen creatures watching from the shadows. Then the silence shattered. With a roar, the gates burst open and the betrayer's minions poured forth. Twisted abominations of flesh and shadow, their forms writhed like nightmares given life. They bore weapons forged of darkness itself, their screeches slicing through the storm. Steel met shadow. The battlefield erupted in chaos as the chosen ones clashed with the tide of monstrosities. Blades flashed in the lightning, shields splintered, under claw and fang, and cries of defiance rose above the storm's fury. Every strike was desperate, every breath hard-earned. Yet even as exhaustion clawed at them, the chosen ones stood unbroken. They fought not only for survival, but for every innocent soul chained by the betrayer's ritual. At the heart of the battle, one chosen raised their weapon high, a beacon against the darkness. Their voice rang out like thunder. This ends tonight. And, for a moment amidst the chaos, hope blazed brighter than fear. The clash at the gates had shaken the fortress, but victory at the threshold was only the beginning. Inside, the betrayer's ritual pulsed with growing power, the obsidian circle glowing brighter with every heartbeat of the earth. The chosen ones forced their way through, battered but unyielding. The corridors of the fortress twisted like a living maze, walls etched with runes that pulsed with an eerie crimson light. At its heart lay the chamber, the circle of binding, the very engine of despair. Chains of shadow coiled outward from the circle, reaching like serpents into the world beyond. Within its glow, the forms of the captured innocents shimmered, their life force siphoned to feed the spell. Their eyes pleaded silently for release. The chosen knew what had to be done. To break the circle was to sever the ritual, to undo the betrayer's design. But it would not yield easily. As they approached, the air grew thick, pressing against their lungs. Figures of shadow rose from the floor, guardians born of the ritual itself, their cries echoing like the screams of the damned. Steel clashed once more. The chosen fought desperately, every strike aimed at pushing closer to the glowing circle. With a final cry, one warrior hurled their weapon into the obsidian ring. The circle shuddered, cracked spiderwebbing across its surface. The fortress groaned as if the very bones of the world were breaking. The ritual was unraveling. The circle cracked, its power unraveling, but with its collapse came a dreadful unveiling. From the shattering glow stepped the betrayer. No longer cloaked in shadows, their form was revealed. Once a chosen, bound by the same destiny as those they now opposed. Their face bore the scars of countless battles, but their eyes burned with something far darker. Hunger, obsession, and the twisted certainty of righteousness. Gasps escaped the chosen ones. Some recognized the betrayer instantly, their memories flashing back to a comrade who had once fought beside them, who had shared their fire. "Why?" one whispered, voice trembling. The betrayer smiled, a cruel, weary curve of the lips. "Because you were blind," they answered. "The world is broken, and your faith in it is weakness. I will tear it down and build it anew. Only through control can there be peace." Their words dripped with venom, but also with conviction. This was no simple lust for power. It was a warped vision, born of despair and pain. The fortress trembled as their aura surged, shadows bending toward them like loyal servants. In their hand, a blade of living darkness coalesced, hissing with the cries of 1,000 souls. The chosen ones steadied themselves. The final truth had been revealed. The betrayer was not some faceless monster. They were one of their own, and that made the battle ahead all the more tragic. The betrayer's laughter echoed through the crumbling fortress, a sound that clawed at the souls of all who heard it. Shadows bent and twisted under his command, forming spears and whips that lashed out like serpents. The chosen ones stood firm, their unity the only shield against the storm. "Together," one shouted, and their voices rose as one. Light surged, answering their bond. Their weapons glowed with divine fire, their auras burning brighter than the collapsing walls around them. Steel clashed against darkness. Sparks of fire and shadow lit the chamber in violent bursts. Each strike of the betrayer's blade carried the weight of despair, while each counter from the chosen carried the weight of hope. The battle was not just of strength but of will. Every step forward tested their faith. Every wound reminded them of the cost of standing against one of their own. Yet they pressed on, refusing to yield. The betrayer unleashed a wave of shadow that split the floor in two, the ground quaking as darkness tried to swallow them whole. But the chosen ones linked hands, their combined power forming a radiant shield that pushed the tide back. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was the deciding clash, the war for the soul of the world. Silence followed the final clash. The betrayer's scream faded into the void as the shadows shattered like glass, dissolving into nothingness. The fortress, once a prison of despair, now stood bathed in a soft glow. Light pierced the ruins, touching every broken stone with warmth. The chosen ones stood together, bruised and bloodied yet unbroken. Their breaths were heavy, but their eyes shone with quiet triumph. The war was over. The darkness had been defeated, not by strength alone, but by the unshakable bond they carried. One by one, they stepped outside into the dawn. The first rays of sunlight broke across the horizon, painting the sky with gold and crimson. It was a sunrise unlike any other, not just the start of a day, but the birth of a new era. The people, long hidden in fear, emerged from the shadows of their shelters. Tears streamed down their faces as they saw their world free again. Children ran to the chosen ones, clinging to them, while elders bowed in gratitude. But the chosen ones knew their journey was not the end. It was the beginning. For light requires guardians and hope demands protectors. And so with the dawn they accepted their role, not just as warriors but as beacons of a future where darkness would never rule again.